like to talk to you about the topics that he will be discussing. On Sunday after Fajr, inshallah, Imam will address you and briefly and let you know about the topics that Imam Rauf will be talking about. Registration is only $40 for the whole 2.5 days, and included in that is 2 lunches and 2 dinners. So it's alhamdulillah a very good deal. I urge each and every one of you, $40 per person, $30 for additional family member. If you have a family of 3 or more, it'll be $100, and students are $20. So without further ado, I just want to give Sheikh Mateen for a few minutes so he can bring you up to speed on what he is going to be talking about.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So inshallah, as you've heard, we'll have our Seerah conference on December 27th, 28th, and 29th. I've, inshallah, chosen 3 different subjects that I am hoping will be something unique, something about the Seerah that maybe you haven't had a chance to discuss or listen to, something that would enrich our understanding of the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The first talk will be about the prophetic interaction with the Sahaba on a mundane level. Meaning we always hear about the big events that happen in their lifetimes, but what was their life like day to day with one another? Meaning on an average day, walking, talking, sitting, what was their interaction like, and what was the benefit in that kind of suhbah with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The second talk, inshallah, will be about prophetic interaction with non-Muslims. So we'll take 3 case examples: Abu Jahl, Abu Talib, and Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh before his conversion to Islam. We'll look at how they were as non-Muslims, how they were with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how he responded back to them. Because he interacted differently with each one of them, and differently at times with each one of them in their own lifetime. So it'll be a way of kind of understanding how the Prophet ﷺ approached these different non-Muslim personalities, and then inshallah we can extrapolate from there and look at our own interaction today with different types of non-Muslims. And then the third talk inshallah will be about lessons from the last moments of the Prophet ﷺ. We'll go through step by step the events that led to the passing of the Prophet ﷺ and immediately after, and what we can gain from those events as far as being prepared for our own end and approaching that in a way that the Prophet ﷺ did, and from lessons from that as well. So inshallah we invite you all to come. Myself and 3 great speakers inshallah will be there as well. Jazakumullahu khair. Assalamu alaikum. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. كتب المصنف يعني إمام النووي رحمه الله: فقد روينا عن علي بن أبي طالب وعبد الله بن مسعود ومعاذ بن جبل وأبي الدرداء وابن عمر وابن عباس وأنس بن مالك وأبي هريرة وأبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله تعالى عنهم من طرق كثيرات وبرواية منوعات أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا من أمر دينها بعث الله تعالى يوم القيامة في زمرة الفقهاء والعلماء. وفي رواية: بعثه الله فقيها عالما. وفي رواية أبي الدرداء: وكنت له يوم القيامة شافعا وشهيدا. وفي رواية ابن مسعود: قيل له ادخل من أي أبواب الجنة شئت. وفي رواية ابن عمر: كتب في زمرة العلماء وحشر في زمرة الشهداء. واتفق الحفاظ على أنه حديث ضعيف وإن كثرت طرقه. So last time we started, this is actually not even the first hadith of the 40 hadith, but in his introduction, Imam Nawawi states this hadith. We spoke about the people that narrated the hadith, the great companions. We said a little bit about each one. Now today we'll start talking about this hadith. And today's lesson, inshallah, will be really interesting. And it's really interesting because it gives you insight into how scholars think. What motivates them. And tonight, inshallah, we'll see Imam Nawawi speak about those things. So he says about the hadith that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever memorizes for the sake of teaching my ummah 40 ahadith from the matters of the deen of this ummah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise him on the day of judgment among the fuqaha and the ulama. In another narration, that Allah will raise him as a faqih, as an alim. In the narration of Abu Darda, the Prophet ﷺ said, I will be with him on the day of judgment as a shafi', meaning someone who does shafa'ah, and a shaheed, somebody who bears witness for him. In the narration of Ibn Mas'ud, it was said to him that it will be said to him, enter in whatever door of Jannah you wish. And in the narration of Ibn Umar, it says that his name will be written among the name of the ulama, and he will be gathered on the day of judgment with the shuhada. The huffaz of hadith have agreed that this hadith is da'if, even though it comes through many chains. So that's what we'll talk about today, inshallah. So first, anna Rasulullah, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he narrated, man hafiza ala ummati 40 haditha. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever does hifz of 40 hadith, ala ummati, meaning for the sake of my ummah's learning, so that they can learn those hadith. First, what does it mean to do hifz of a hadith? When we talk about hifz of Quran, it means to memorize it. When we talk about hifz of a book, it means to memorize it. But when we talk about hifz of hadith, we don't mean just memorizing it. Hifz of hadith means that you learn the hadith and you pass it on to someone else. The passing on is integral, not just memorizing it. And by memorizing it, it doesn't mean necessarily that you understand it. You don't have to understand the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, لَيُبَلِّغَ الشَّاهِدُ مِنْكُمُ الْغَائِبِ, that those of you who are present now listening to my hadith should pass this hadith on to those people who aren't here. There's no condition of understanding. Is that clear? That to do hifz of a hadith doesn't necessarily mean that you understand it or you know how it's used. It means that you memorized it, you learned it, you turned around and you passed it on to somebody else. This is a job of a muhaddith. The job of a muhaddith is to get the hadith, grade it, find out how reliable it is, and then pass it on. They're like a pharmacist. A pharmacist gets the medicine. He can tell you things about where the medicine came from, what is its composition, but his job is not to use it. The job of the faqih is to use the hadith. Now the faqih, generally, they're muhaddith anyway. But their specialty is not going to be in knowing all the details about the hadith, where it came from and all of this. They will look to the muhaddithun to say, tell me about this hadith. Is it strong? Is it weak? What is its position? Then the fuqaha, their job is to understand where the usage of this hadith is proper. What is it trying to tell us? How many different places can we use it? So it's very important to understand this point. Remember, Imam Nawawi was both a muhaddith and a faqih. He knew the sciences of hadith, and he also knew how to use them. So we can think of the muhaddith like the pharmacist. He has a very important role. And the faqih like the doctor. The doctor's job is to know when and where to apply the medicine. The faqih's job is to know when and where to apply the hadith. Inshallah, as we go on, that difference will become even more clear. So he said, whoever does hifz of 40 ahadith, ala ummati, for the sake of my ummah's learning. There's two types of ummahs. There's ummatul da'wah and ummatul ijabah. Ummatul da'wah are those people that the messenger is calling. He's doing da'wah to those people. So the Prophet ﷺ, who did he do da'wah to? What group of people? The Prophet ﷺ did da'wah to what group of people? Who was he sent for? Everyone. Every human being. Then there's ummatul ijabah. Ijabah are the people who answered the call. And those are the believers. So when the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith is saying, ala ummati, he's speaking about which group of ummah? Which one? Ummatul da'wah or ummatul ijabah? Ijabah. It doesn't make sense. These are 40 hadiths for the non-Muslim. What good is it for them? So here the ummah that's being referred to, and generally when ummah is used, it refers to ummatul ijabah. The people that have already accepted Islam, because those are the ones, meaning us, who will benefit from the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 40 haditha, 40 hadith. And I told you last time, I like numbers. The hadith, they include 4 different things about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 4 different things. Give me one of them. What he said, his aqwal. What else? Huh? His a'mal, his af'al. Number 2. 2 more. Huh? His taqreer. So what you mean, not approved generally, taqreer refers to those things that are implicitly agreed to. For example, if anything is done in front of a prophet, and it is wrong, it is the prophet's duty to point it out, that this is wrong. You and me, we have the command for al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, but if the situation is such that if we try to correct, sometimes there's people that if you try to correct them, it causes more harm than good in doing it. Right? We all know people like that. If you try to correct them, the fitna that will come out trying to correct them will be worse than what the act that they were doing. Sometimes we will see a wrong being done and we will stay quiet on it. Because we know if we try to do al-amr bil-ma'ruf will cause more harm in it. This is not the case for a prophet. If something wrong is being done in front of a prophet, they must point it out. Why? Why can't they stay quiet? That's too easy of an answer. Because if the Prophet stayed quiet, the ummah would not know. Did he stay quiet because what was being done is okay? Or did he stay quiet because he was in a position where he couldn't correct it? Understand? These people were sent for guidance. We have to be able to get guidance from them. So it is not permitted for a prophet to stay quiet when something wrong is being done in front of them. So if something is being done in front of the prophet and the prophet says nothing, that means it was okay. This is taqreer. This is number 3. So his words, his actions, his taqreer, and then number 4? his shama'il, if that's his shama'il, meaning his inside, his inner characteristics and his outward characteristics. What did he look like? How did he walk? How did he sit? What was his personality like? These are part of the shama'il. So the word hadith includes these four things: the actions, the statements, the taqreer, meaning the implicit consent, and then number four, the shama'il, his habits inside and outside. So 40 ahadith, meaning any of these type of different hadith. Min amri diniha, meaning from the matters of the deen of this ummah. So whoever does these things, this is the shart. Whoever does hifz of 40 ahadith from the matters of this ummah, the Prophet ﷺ said, بَعَثَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فِي زُمْرَةِ الْفُقَهَاءِ وَالْعُلَمَاءِ. Allah will raise that person on the day of judgment with the group of the fuqaha and the ulama. What's meant here is not that that person will be a faqih or an alim. Unfortunately, we meet a lot of people today. They memorize 40 hadith and they're a scholar. Prophet ﷺ is not saying that. You memorize a few hadith, now you can give fatwa. What he's saying is that you can memorize 40 hadith and you will be raised on the day of judgment with the fuqaha and the ulama, even though you're not one of them. But you'll have the honor of being among them. Arba'een. You know, I'm sure we've noticed that this number 40, it comes up a lot. There's no Quranic ayah about it, about the greatness of the number 40. There's no hadith about the greatness of the number 40. But yet we find this number coming up repeatedly in our deen. For example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called Musa to speak to him, He called him for how many nights? 40. It said that when a believer dies, his place of prayer, his musalla, cries for him for 40 days. It's also said that when a parent makes dua for his or her child, that dua lasts, meaning the barakah of that dua lasts for 40 years. So even though the father, the mother may have passed away, but if they made dua for you, the barakah of that dua will last for 40 years, and usually, most of us will not live 40 years past our parents. So meaning our entire lifetime, we gain from the barakah of their dua, and our children as well. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu an, you know, who was the first person to accept Islam? The first adult was Sayyidina Abu Bakr. Who was number 40? I just mentioned it. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu an was number 40. And with his acceptance of Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He revealed the ayah, Ya ayyuhan nabi hasbuka Allah. O Prophet, Allah is enough for you. Meaning it's a show from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala how much He loved the conversion of Umar radiallahu an. He was in number 40, and after that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you have what you need. There's a muhaddith by the name of Bishr al-Hafi, rahimahullah. He said to the other muhaddithun, Ya ahl al-hadith, i'malu min kulli arba'ina hadithan bihadithin. That for every 40 hadith that you learn, practice one of them. For every 40 hadith you learn, practice one of them. How much zakah do we give? For every $40 we give, $1. That's 2.5%. Every 40 is 1. Al-Hashi was saying that for Al-Hafi was saying that for every hadith, 40 hadith that you memorize, the zakah of that 40 hadith, O people of hadith, is practicing one of them. So we see this number coming up over and over again, 40. There's nothing concrete in the Quran or Sunnah about it, but there's something there. And this is why perhaps the Prophet ﷺ as well mentioned it in this hadith. He continued in another narration. Imam Nawawi now he mentioned the first narration, then he mentions other narrations of this hadith, how they came in different ways, different wordings. So he says in another narration, بَعَثَ اللَّهُ فَقِيهًا عَالِمًا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise this person as a faqih and as an alim. In another narration, من حمل من أمتي 40 حديثا لقي الله يوم القيامة فقيها عالما. That this person will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment as a faqih and as an alim. So here we see the wording is a little bit different. من حمل من أمتي. Hamal means to carry. Hifz means what? Hifz means to pass on to someone. In the context of hadith, I told you, right? In the context of hadith, hifz means that you learn it and you pass it on. Here, one of the narrations is saying, man hamala, whoever carries it. Here, the specialness of it doesn't even have to be that you pass it on, but that you just memorize it. It's good news for us. That there's a lot of short ahadith that we can memorize. 40 of them shouldn't be too difficult. All of us can do that. Memorize 40 hadith. Inshallah, this riwayah will apply to us. Maybe we can do even one step better and teach it to our children. So they learn 40 hadiths from us, then we fall into this definition of hifz as well. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise us among the fuqaha and the ulama on the day of judgment. He says another narration, وَفِي رِوَايَةِ أَبِي الدَّرْدَاء, in the narration of Abu Darda, وَكُنْتُ لَهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ شَافِعًا وَشَهِيدًا. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that on the day of judgment, I will do shafa'ah for this person, and I will be a witness for this person as well. What greater honor can we have? That the Prophet ﷺ is waiting for us on the day of judgment because we memorized 40 hadith. That was it. And he would do shafa'ah for us. وفي رواية ابن مسعود, in the narration of Ibn Mas'ud, it will be said to this person, قِيلَ لَهُ أُدْخُلْ مِنْ أَيِّ أَبْوَابِ الْجَنَّةَ شِئْتَ. Enter through whatever door of Jannah you'd like. Just 40 hadith. Whatever door of Jannah you want, that's yours. Go pass through it. In the narration of Ibn Umar, كُتِبَ فِي زُمْرَةِ الْعُلَمَاءِ وَحُشِرَ فِي زُمْرَةِ الشُّهَدَاءِ. That he will be in the group of ulama, and on the day of judgment he will be gathered with the group of shuhada. The fuqaha, the ulama, the shuhada, having shafa'ah of the Prophet ﷺ, having him as a witness for us. There's so many honors for doing this. But, وَاتَّفَقَ الْحُفَّاظ, I mentioned huffaz here. There are 4 types of students of hadith. The first one is the one who is a learner. He's a beginner, the talib. He's just starting to learn hadith. So he's a talib. Number 2 is the muhaddith. The muhaddith is the one who's gained a higher level in it. He's mastered teaching the hadith. So this is someone who spent years teaching hadith to other tullab. He became a muhaddith. After that is the hafiz. The hafiz is the one who has memorized 100,000 ahadith. And then the 4th level is the hujjah. The one who is a hujjah is the one who has memorized 300,000 ahadith. You get that level. So he says, وَاتَّفَقَ الْحُفَّاظ عَلَى أَنَّهُ حَدِيثٌ ضَعِيفٌ وَإِنْ كَثُرَتْ طُرُقُهُ. The huffaz have agreed that this hadith is da'if, even though it's come to us through many, many narrations. What do you mean? This hadith is da'if. If this hadith is da'if, why is Imam Nawawi using it? If this hadith is da'if, why do we even have a book of 40 hadith? Why even write one on a weak hadith? Imam Nawawi answers this later on himself, so I'll wait for him to do it. What is being said here is this hadith has been narrated in multiple different versions, as I mentioned some of them. It's been narrated back to many of the companions, as we discussed some of them last week. But in every single narration, there is a weakness in the chain. There's a weakness in the chain. Either someone is missing, or either someone is unknown, or someone is weak in their memory. So every single chain that we have, although we have a lot of them, they have a weakness such that we can't say any of them are sahih. Let's talk a little bit about hadith. I'm not going to talk too much. The last time I gave the last time I gave a class on introduction to hadith, I spent 15 lessons on it. We would easily surpass the time. We wouldn't get any further in this book if we were to really get into it in a good way. But very generally, let's take two general headings, two general categories of hadith. The first category is mutawatir. Hadith mutawatir. Mutawatir is something that is mass transmitted. Let me give you an example. If one person comes through that door right now and he says, Brother Mateen, your car is on fire. I've never met this guy. Maybe by his appearance, he doesn't look like he's trustworthy. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna ignore him. He's probably lying. Maybe he doesn't like my lesson and he wants me to stop. Now, if he comes in and says, your car is on fire, Brother Mateen, and right after him, another person comes in and says, your car is on fire, am I going to believe the two of them? I might not. If I don't believe them, why won't I believe them? If they're related? You're on the right track. The fact that the two of them came in one after another means that the two of them could have talked to each other. They could have decided, we really don't like this guy. Let's come in, let's stop the lesson right now. You say it, you're right after me, I'll come, then you come. And we'll get him to stop. So it's very possible that the two got together to lie. So I may not accept that. Now, if one person walks in from there, another person walks in from an entirely different entrance, I get a call on my phone saying, are you, Brother Mateen, your car's on fire outside. Now am I going to start believing it? Now I'm going to be much more likely to believe it. Because now I'm getting 3 different reports from 3 different people that didn't talk to each other who are telling me the exact same thing. Now imagine if 10 people did that to me, or 20 people did that to me. At that point I have no doubt. I'm getting up, I'm running out to put my car out, take the fire out. At that point, right? This is what is meant by mutawatir. That something is narrated in so many different ways, from so many different angles, that to believe it to be wrong is impossible. The example I like to give is North Korea. How many people here have been to North Korea? How many people here know someone who's been to North Korea? Nobody. How many of you people believe that North Korea doesn't really exist? You all do. But none of you have been there. None of you have met someone from there. None of you have seen it, but yet you all believe it. You have no doubt about it. The reason you have no doubt about it is because you read it in books, you've heard it on the news, you've been tested on it in school, you've heard it from so many different sources that the chance of it not existing is near impossible, if not impossible. This is tawatur. When we say a hadith is mutawatir, we mean it has come to us in so many different ways that rejection of it is impossible. How do we know the Quran has not been changed from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? How do we know? It's the same way. We know the Quran is the same as what was spoken by the Prophet ﷺ or recited by the Prophet ﷺ, because the Quran has reached us in so many different ways from so many different companions with unbroken chains that it is impossible for anyone to deny that this came from the mouth of the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, even non-Muslims don't deny this fact. They can't. It makes no sense to deny it. No one would. The next level of hadith, you have your tawatur or mutawatir. The next level of hadith is ahad. Ahad is something that isn't tawatur. Maybe one person narrated it, maybe 2, maybe 3 people narrated it, but not to the level at which you have yaqeen, like in mass transmission. So you got that? 2 different categories. One is mass transmitted, one is what's called single transmitted. Single doesn't necessarily mean it has to be one, it's just not mass transmitted. In the category of single transmission, there are 3 types, really 4, but for us 3. In the single transmission, there are three types. They are sahih, hasan, and da'if. Can a mass transmitted hadith be da'if? What if this person came in here, told me your car's on fire, I know he's a liar, meaning I know him as a liar. The other person comes in, he says your car's on fire. I know this guy's a joker too. I get the call on the phone. Maybe it's my wife. I have no reason to say she's lying. She tells me your car's on fire. Actually, no, let's not use the wife. Someone else I know calls, and he's a liar. And then another source, and another source. But I know all of them to be liars. But yet they're all saying that my car's on fire. Is my car on fire? What is the possibility that all of them separately made up the exact same lie? Even liars tell the truth sometimes. You understand? So even if a bunch of liars come together, separately told you the same thing, it must be true, even though each and every single one of them we know to be liars. Because even liars don't always lie. They tell the truth. Here, they're telling the truth. There's no way that all of these people got together to all of these people made up the exact same lie to me. Not possible. So when it comes to mass transmitted hadith, we don't need to look at who's in the chain. It doesn't matter. They could all be liars. But in this situation, they're telling the truth. But in ahad hadith, in single transmission, this is not the case. Because now one person is telling me my car is on fire, I have to evaluate this person. How much do I trust him? If he's someone I know, never lied to me, always been honest, I trust him completely, I'm getting up, even though it's one person telling me. Because I know him to be truthful. When it comes to single transmission hadith, we evaluate the hadith to determine how much can we trust it. Guys following me? Two categories of hadith: mass transmitted, single transmission. Under the single transmission, there's three categories of hadith: sahih, hasan, and da'if. When we look at a single transmission hadith, we evaluate it according to three things. Number one, we look at the chain of narrators. Is it complete or is it broken? Is there somebody missing, or do we have every single person? Meaning, yeah, that's good enough. Number two, the individuals in that chain. The chain may be complete, but if one of the individuals is a known liar, or he's unknown entirely, it brings weakness to that chain. And then number three, the actual body of the hadith, what's being said in the hadith. Does it contradict something in the Quran? If it is, then the hadith becomes weak. Does it contradict something in a stronger hadith? If it does, then the hadith becomes weak. So when we look at a single transmission hadith to decide if it's sahih, hasan, or da'if, we look at three things. The actual chain, is it complete? The people in the chain, are they trustworthy? Are they good with their memory? And then number three, the actual body of the hadith. And based upon those three things, we decide, is this hadith trustworthy or not? If all three of those things are complete, meaning they're good, this is a sahih hadith. If one of the narrators maybe had a poor memory, or he makes mistakes, then the hadith is hasan. And if the hadith is not sahih nor hasan, it's da'if. It's weak. Everyone got that? This is a crash course on the usul hadith. Understand? So, Imam al-Nawawi, he said that this hadith is da'if. Not only is he saying it, but he's saying ittafaqa al-muhaddith or huffaz, that the scholars of hadith agree that this hadith is da'if. So now the big question is, ya Imam Nawawi, they said you're a muhaddith, they said you're a faqih, but you wrote a whole book based upon a weak hadith? Now he answers that question. وقد صنف العلماء رضي الله عنه في هذا الباب ما لا يحصى من المصنفات فأول من علمته صنف فيه عبد الله ابن مبارك ثم محمد بن أسلم الطوسي العالم الرباني ثم الحسن بن سفيان النسوي وأبو بكر آجوري وأبو بكر محمد بن إبراهيم الأصفهاني والدار قطني والحاكم وأبو نعيم وأبو عبد الرحمن السلمي وأبو سعيد الماليني وأبو أثمان الصابوني وعبد الله ابن محمد الأنصاري وأبو بكر البيهقي وخلائق لا يحصون من المتقدمين والمتأخرين. Remember I told you that Imam Nawawi is going to tell you what a scholar thinks like. So he said, first he said this hadith is weak. Now he's making the case for why he used it. He says that the ulama, may Allah be pleased with them, wrote many books, enough books that you can't count on this topic of 40 ahadith. وقد صنف العلماء رضي الله عنهم في هذا الباب ما لا يحصى من المصنفات. That they have written so many books on this subject that we can't even count them. You can't count them. And so what he's pointing at is these ulama are people that should be followed. We should follow them. These are good examples for us. Who are those? He says, فَأَوَّلُ مَنْ عَلِمْتُهُ صَنَّفَ فِيهِ. The first person that I know who wrote a book about 40 hadith, Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Who's heard this name before? Ibn Mubarak. A very famous person. He was from the Tabi'een. He was among the 40 scholars who used to sit with Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah. Imam Abu Hanifa used to have a council of 40 different hadith, 40 different ulama. It's not that this is one person working on his own. He had 40 different scholars who used to sit with him, and they used to together think and debate upon a particular mas'ala. And they would talk about it. They had some of them who were muhaddithun. Abdullah ibn Mubarak was one of them. He was one of the muhaddithin of that group. His father, the interesting point, his father was a slave. One amazing thing about Islam, whenever any other group of people have gone to another place and conquered that place, they colonized it, they took its resources, they subjugated its people, they took what they could before they were finally kicked out. This has been the way of just about every group of people, except for Islam. Wherever Islam went, it took those people there and it raised them. Wherever Islam went, the people who were conquered, within a generation, those people became the ulama of our deen. Those people became the ones that the Arabs, the other people, the other Muslims would go to them and sit at their feet. This is what Islam did to people. It raised them wherever it went. The hadith, the ilm of hadith, of course, started in the Hijaz, in Medina, in Mecca. Then as the companions went out to Iraq, Kufa, Basra, then the ilm of hadith went out there as well. From there, it went to those lands that are mu'arrab, meaning they weren't Arab to begin with, but they were made into Arabs, like Sham in Misr. So the science of hadith then went out to these places. After that, the science of hadith went out even further, to Morocco, Andalus, to Persia, to the Caucasus, Ma wara al-Nahr. So we find people like Imam Muslim, who is from Persia, Imam Bukhari, who is Uzbeki. We find these great muhaddithun who weren't Arab. The science of Islam, the science of hadith, it moved, it went, and wherever it went, it took the people there and it honored them with the knowledge of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. From there, it kept going. As Islam spread to the subcontinent, then we find amazing works of hadith from the subcontinent. Awjaz al-Masalik, this huge, multiple, I think the one I have at home is maybe 12 volumes of explanation on the Muwatta of Imam Malik. Fathul Mulhim on Sahih Muslim. Multiple different works on Bukhari. Multiple different works on Abu Dawood and Nasai. coming from the subcontinent. This is what Islam did. Wherever it went, it raised those people. So the father of Abdullah ibn Mubarak was a slave, meaning he wasn't an Arab. And then Abdullah became Abdullah because Islam raised him. You know, one time, someone came to Abdullah ibn Mubarak, rahimahullah, and asked him that, why do you like being alone? Why do you like being isolated to yourself? He answered him saying that the one who sits with the Prophet, the companions, and the tabi'un, he's never alone. What he means is the one who sits with the books, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions and the people that came after him. This person is never alone. In fact, this is the best of gatherings, to be alone with these things. Then he mentioned after him, ثم محمد بن أسلم, Muhammad ibn Aslam al-Tusi. Al-Tusi is from Khurasan. Where is Khurasan? Where is it? Afghanistan? It's right, Afghanistan, Iran, right in that border region. Good. So he said, then the next person to write a book on the 40 hadith was Muhammad ibn Aslam, who was from Khurasan. He gave him a title, Al-Alim al-Rabbani. Al-Alim al-Rabbani is that alim who has perfected Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. He is an alim, he is an amil, he is an arif. This is what scholars, they want to be. Imam Nawawi is not just naming random people. He's saying these are the people whose footsteps I'm walking in. I wrote 40 hadith because these people wrote 40 hadith. He was alim al-Rabbani, he was a complete scholar. He was someone who learned all of these things and he passed it on to other people as well. After him, Al-Hasan ibn Sufyan al-Nasawi, who was a muhaddith from Khurasan as well. Then Abu Bakr al-Ajuri. Al-Ajuri also from the same area. He too was a muhaddith. Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Asfahani. Where's Asfahan? Iraq, Iran, that area. Back then they weren't the same borders, that area. After him, Ad-Dar al-Qutni. This is a name I'm sure many of us heard. He has a very famous sunan, Ad-Dar al-Qutni. He too wrote a book of 40 hadith. Then Al-Hakim. Al-Hakim too is a very famous muhaddith. He has his Al-Mustadrak of Sahih Hadith. Again, another muhaddith that he was walking in the footsteps of. He was from Naysapur. Where's Naysapur? Persia. Same area. Then Abu Nu'aym. Abu Nu'aym, maybe you don't know him, that name as much. He was Asfahani as well. But his work, Hilyatul Awliya, is very well known. Hilyatul Awliya has been translated in all of the major Muslim languages. These are stories and statements by the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he collected. Then Abu Abdurrahman as-Sulami. Then Abu Sa'id al-Malini. Al-Malini is an area near Herat. Where's Herat? Afghanistan. Maybe it's on the border of Pakistan, but I think it's still, even today, I think it's still in Afghanistan. Then Abu Uthman as-Sabuni. As-Sabun is not a place. Sabun is soap. His family used to make that. That was their business. That's why he's known that. Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Ansari, who was a great Hanbali scholar. Again, same kind of person, an alim, an amil, an arif, somebody who took all the sciences of Islam and mastered them. Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi, I don't think al-Bayhaqi needs an introduction, very well known. After mentioning all of these, it says, وَخَلَائِقُ لَا يُحْصَوْنَ, that all of these, you can't count them. Meaning there are so many ulama, so many fuqaha, so many muhaddithun that wrote a book on 40 hadith, مِنَ الْمُتَقَدِّمِينَ وَالْمُتَأَخِّرِينَ. This is another important point. He's laying the case for why he's practicing on a weak hadith. The first reason is because all of these great scholars did it. from the mutaqaddimeen and the mutaakhireen. Imam Nawawi is pointing out a fact among all of the ulama of this ummah, that we follow not only the salaf, but we follow the khalaf as well. Not only do we follow the salaf al-salihin, we all do. You are not part of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah if you don't follow the salaf al-salihin. When someone says, I follow the salaf, that's nonsense. Who doesn't follow the salaf? Are you talking about Shia? If you're talking to a Sunni, of course I follow the salaf. We all do. Ahl Sunnah, meaning the people of Sunnah, wal Jama'ah, the Jama'ah are the companions. We all follow the salaf al-salihin. But what Imam Nawawi is pointing out, of all these people that he mentioned, with the exception of Abdullah ibn Mubarak, the rest of them were not from the salaf al-salihin. They were from the khalaf, meaning they are the pious and correct scholars of this ummah. Why does it not make sense to follow the salaf but not the khalaf? If someone says, I'm going to ignore maybe 1,200 years of scholarship, and I'm only going to follow the salaf, why does that not make sense? Who gave you the information of the salaf? Who did it come through? Did you sit with them? Did they write books and you're reading them directly now? The information about them, the statements from them came through the khalaf. How are you going to bypass the source, bypass the means and go directly to the source? You cannot. And this has never been the way of the ulama. Imam Nawawi is making very clear that the mutaqaddimeen, the earlier people of the khalaf, and the mutaakhireen, the later people of the khalaf, I want to walk in their footsteps. And they wrote books on the 40 ahadith based upon this hadith. He says, then, that was reason number one. Reason number two, وَقَدْ إِسْتَخَرْتُ اللَّهِ, I did istikhara. I sought Allah's opinion and help. I did istikhara with Allah fi jam'i arba'ina hadithan, on bringing together, on gathering the 40 hadiths. Iqtida'an biha'ula'i al-a'immat al-a'lam. Iqtida'an meaning following these very knowledgeable scholars before me, the ones he just named. Wa huffaz al-Islam. And these people who were the huffaz of our deen. وقد اتفق العلماء على جواز العمل بالحديث الضعيف في فضائل الأعمال. Here's reason number three. Reason number three is that the ulama have agreed that it is permissible to practice upon weak hadith in those things that are about fada'il. Those things that are about fadila, about the benefits, about giving tarheeb and targheeb of encouragement on actions. But it's not that simple. There are three different opinions when it comes to following weak hadith. Actually, before I say that, let me make it very clear. We do not practice on weak hadith in aqeedah and on ahkam. Meaning we don't base our belief on weak hadith, and we don't decide on the halal and the haram on weak hadith. Everyone agrees on this. There's no difference of opinion, period. Now the question is, what about things other than that? Can we use weak hadith for that? There are three different opinions on this. The first opinion is that weak hadith can be used for a lot of different things. Meaning you don't have to be picky about it. The condition though, for those ulama, the condition is, if you don't find any stronger hadith, then you can look to the weaker hadith. Meaning you search through the Sahih, you search through the Hasan. You didn't find anything. You didn't find anything in the Quran, of course. Now you decide, do I take the opinion of a person or do I look at weak hadith? Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad, these great ai their opinion was, I would rather take a weak hadith over the opinion of an individual. Does weak mean that it's wrong? No. This is an important point. A lot of people miss this. Weak doesn't mean it's wrong. Weak means we don't know. The chain is weak. The narrators are weak. Even the narrator may be a liar. But even liars sometimes tell the truth. So a weak hadith doesn't automatically mean it's wrong. The question is, can we rely on it or not? This is the question. Not that it's a lie. Brother, it's da'if, it means it's a lie. No, it doesn't. Da'if means we can't trust it. Now what do we do with it? So some of the scholars say, and like I gave you the names, they're not just any scholars. These are the a'imma of this deen. They say that if you don't have anything stronger, then you can look at these weak hadith as long as they don't contradict something stronger. But even then, you don't know for sure, so you're not going to have yaqeen in it. It's possible. This is why we don't take in aqeedah. In aqeedah matters, we need to be sure about it. We don't take da'if hadith. In things that are halal and haram, we need to be sure about it. We don't take da'if hadith. The second category of people, they say, we don't take da'if hadith, period. We're not going to use it. Why? Because it's like dhann. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَإِيَّاكُمُ الظَّنِّ وَالظَّنِّ أَكْذَبُ الْحَدِيثِ. That those things that are dhanni, they're doubtful, this is the worst type of speech. And there's ayat in the Quran as well, speaking against dhann. So these scholars say, we don't take da'if hadith at all. Then the third group of scholars, this is the majority, if not as Imam Nawawi said, this is ittafaq al-ulama, that the vast majority of scholars hold this opinion, and that is that weak hadith can be used in the situation of fada'il, when we want to encourage someone to do something. Now it's not that easy either. There's 3 conditions. Imam Nawawi mentions these conditions in another book of his called Al-Minhaj, which is his explanation of Sahih Muslim. He also mentions in other books of his as well. Ibn Hajar Asqalani, the great muhaddith himself, mentions these same 3 conditions, and other muhaddithun as well. Those 3 conditions are, number 1, that the weak hadith not be very weak. What's meant by a very weak hadith? Very weak hadith means that one of the narrators is known to be a liar. Or somebody that is muttaham, meaning is muttaham, that someone has accused him of lying. If this kind of person is in the chain, this is too weak of a hadith, we won't take that. The second condition is that the hadith have some basis to it. Meaning that what's being mentioned, that action, it have some basis in the Quran or the Sunnah. Let me give you an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Quran, to send blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Inna Allah wa malaikatu yusalluna ala nabi. That Allah and the malaika, they send blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you too send peace and blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So from the Quran we have a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send blessings on the Prophet. So the asl, the basis of this practice is set. There's no denying it. Now we find a weak hadith that says, أكثر الصلوات علي يوم الجمعة. That the Prophet ﷺ said, أكثر الصلاة. That increase the amount of salawat you send upon me on the day of judgment. أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. This hadith is weak. But the basis of sending salawat on the Prophet is known from Quran. So this hadith is acceptable in the category of fada'il. Make sense? So the first condition was that the hadith not be too weak. The second condition is that the practice that's being mentioned in the hadith, it have the basis from something that is Quran or Sahih hadith. And then the third condition is that when you practice on a da'if hadith, that you not think that it is the sunnah with certainty. Meaning when we practice on a da'if hadith, what we think about it is that it's possible the Prophet ﷺ said this. Although we don't know with yaqeen, we don't know for sure. Make sense? Let's put it all together, this crash course on ulum al-hadith. You have mass transmitted hadith. Then you have single transmitted hadith. In the single transmitted hadith, you have three categories: sahih, hasan, da'if. To decide which one of the three the hadith is, we will look at three different things. We will look at the chain, the people in the chain, and then the body of the hadith itself. After that, the question becomes, okay, the hadith is da'if, can we practice upon it or not? Imam Nawawi brings three different arguments in his defense. He says, number one, this was the practice of the Khalaf before me. The great knowledgeable scholars, they did it. Number two, he says that I did istikhara and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided me towards this. And number three, he says that the ulama have agreed that we can practice on da'if hadith when it comes to fada'il. Now he explains further. وَمَعَ هَذَا فَلَيْسَ اعْتِمَادِي عَلَى هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ. He says, despite all of this, my trust is not entirely on this hadith alone. Listen, and inshallah it'll all come together. He says, بَلْ عَلَى قَوْلِهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم في الأحاديث الصحيحة. But rather, my trust is in the ahadith. The hadith is of the Prophet, the sahih hadith is of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What are those sahih hadith? He says, لِيُبَلِّغِ الشَّاهِدُ مِنْكُمُ الْغَائِبِ. Number one, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the companions at the time of his last Hajj, that whoever is present today should transmit my hadith to those people who are not present. And not just speaking to the Sahaba, but speaking through them to all the other believers that are coming afterwards. It's not just the Sahaba we're supposed to pass it on. When they passed it to the Tabi'een, their job was to turn around and pass it on to the next generation. And so on, until it reached us today. So the Prophet ﷺ said in a Sahih Hadith, pass on my statements. وَقَوْلِهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم نَذَّرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأً سمع مقالتي فوعاها فأداها كما سمعها. The next hadith that Imam Nawawi is quoting is that the Prophet ﷺ said, may Allah beautify the man who listens to my speech, memorizes it, and then passes it on the way he memorized it, the way he heard it. So what Imam Nawawi is saying is that this hadith that I quoted to you about the 40 hadith, it's weak. I grant that. I accept that. I know that. And my trust in writing this book, my i'timad on writing this book is not entirely on this one da'if hadith, but rather my trust is on sahih hadith of the Prophet ﷺ saying, pass on what you have heard from me, and the dua of the Prophet ﷺ that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautify the person that listens to my speech and then passes it on as he heard them. So what Imam Nawawi is doing is he's making the case for those three conditions that I told you about. Number one, the hadith is not that weak. And he's already said who's narrated it. Number two, that it have an asl to it. What the hadith is saying, the 40 hadith is saying, pass on 40 hadith. The passing on of hadith is known from sahih hadith. So the asl of it is there. So he's making that case that although this hadith is da'if, the conditions that we need to fulfill are there. It has an asl to it. It's been used this way before. And because I've told you that it's weak, you're not going to have yaqeen on the fact that this is truly a sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But it can be used. ثم من العلماء من جمع 40 في أصول الدين. So he said from the ulama, there are some of them who gathered 40 hadith on the usul, on the principles, not the principles, the basis of deen. So that is speaking about Allah, Tawheed, Risala, and the Akhirah. Hadith, some people have gathered hadith on this topic. وَبَعْضُهُمْ فِي الْفُرُوعِ. Some of them have gathered it on the furu'i things, meaning the smaller ahkam, the smaller things that we find in the deen. وَبَعَدَهُمْ فِي الْجِهَادِ Some of them gathered 40 hadith on the virtues of jihad. وَبَعَدَهُمْ فِي الزُّهْدِ Some of them gathered it on the virtues of zuhd. وَبَعَدَهُمْ فِي الْآدَابِ Some of them gathered it on adab and adab. وَبَعَدَهُمْ فِي الْخُطَبِ And some of them gathered it on nasiha. 40 hadith on advices. وَكُلُّهَا مَقَاصِدُ صَالِحَةً And all of them was good. Meaning their purpose was salih. It was correct. It was righteous. رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْ قَاصِدِيهَا May Allah be pleased with all of their intent and their purpose in doing it. وَقَدْ رَأَيْتُ جَمَعَ أَرْبَعِينَ أَهَمَّ مِنْ هَذَا كُلِّهِ And I thought that gathering 40 hadith on the most important hadith of all of these things, meaning of the usul, of the furu', of the adab, of the khutab, and all the things that he mentioned that people have done before him. وَهِيَ أَرْبَعُونَ حَدِيثًا مُشْتَمِلَةٌ عَلَى جَمِيعِ ذَلِكَ So I'm going to gather 40 hadith that include all the other things that people have done before me. Meaning all those different categories that they gathered it on, my 40 hadith is going to be more comprehensive, not comprehensive, maybe bigger, in the sense that it will incorporate everything that they have done. وَكُلُّ حَدِيثٍ مِّنْهَا قَاعِدَةٌ عَظِيمَةٌ مِّن قَوَاعِدِ الدِّينِ That all of the hadith in my collection are on the major principles from the principles of deen, meaning those things upon which the rulings of the deen and the base and the ahkam of the deen are based upon. قد وصفه العلماء بأن مدار الإسلام عليه. The ulama, again, Imam Nawawi, he's a great scholar, but yet he's repeatedly going back to the ulama. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I want this to be very clear, because unfortunately we live in a time now where people, for whatever reason, think they don't need the ulama. That they can just go to the Quran, they can just go to the hadith, and they can just skip over all the khalaf for the past 1300 years. But Imam Nawawi, being a muhaddith, being a faqih, Imam Nawawi, in case we're not aware of his stature, in the Shafi'i madhab, today, if Imam Shafi'i said something, and Imam Nawawi said something different, we will take the opinion of Imam Nawawi over Imam Shafi'i. Not that he's a greater scholar, but he did tahqiq of the opinions of Imam Shafi'i, and based on the usul of Imam Shafi'i, he gave his rulings. Most of the time he agreed with his Imam, and at times he differed. And when he differed, the Shafi'iyya of today will follow Imam Nawawi mostly. This is his stature. And yet this person of this stature is saying ulama, fuqaha, going back to the people, scholars before him. So he says the ulama have categorized, or have described the hadith that I'm going to put in my 40 as the madar al-Islam, as the thing that Islam is based upon. Or, أو هو نصف الإسلام, or this hadith represents half of Islam. أو ثلثه, or a third of Islam. أو نحو ذلك, or similar to that. Inshallah, we'll stop here for today. And I think next week, inshallah, we will finally start the first hadith. We're not entirely done with the muqaddamah, his introduction. We still have a couple small paragraphs. Inshallah, we'll finish that next time. Go ahead.
So, I don't know if you covered this in earlier session, but I think Imam Nawawi has 42 hadiths, right?
Correct.
And also, isn't it true that he completed, like another scholar, Ibn Salah's hadith collection, that he added to it or something? So basically my question is that it's not really 40, it's 42, so why is there so much emphasis on the 40 in general where it's 42?
So the brother's mentioning a really good question, that if you actually sat down and counted the ahadith in Imam Nawawi's Arba'een, you will find that there's 42 of them. And so the ulama have explained this in a couple different ways. And inshallah, we'll talk about it when we get to 41 and 42. If inshallah, Allah willing, we get there. But the scholars have explained this in a couple of different ways. Number one, that the statement of the 40 hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is not literally 40, but about 40. And this is done oftentimes. Sometimes we'll round up, and we'll say something, we'll round down. And number two is if you actually look at the last two hadith in the Arba'in, you will find that they are a bit different than the other 40. And so those last two hadith, they actually describe why we should follow the first 40 ahadith. And inshallah, when we get there, we'll talk more about that. So even though he put 42, he's still doing amal on the 40. It's not that he left. In fact, he's saying very clearly that's what he's doing. Go ahead.
When you talk about memorizing hadith, is it the text or text plus chain, and there are variations in like this complete chain, then there are variations in chain,
Right.
then there are variations in the text.
Right.
So when you talk about like, memorizing hadith, is it like doing the whole thing?
So he's asking the question about memorizing 40 hadith. Do we have to memorize the sanad with the 40 hadith, with the hadith, meaning the chain and every single person in that chain? And if a hadith comes with a different riwayah, a different version, do we have to know all of those different riwayat or not? According to the ulama, each riwayah is its own separate hadith. Each riwayah is its own separate hadith. So memorizing any of the different versions of a hadith is good enough to count as one hadith. And for this particular hadith, the ulama have generally taken it on its itlaq, meaning on its generality, in that it only applies to the body of the hadith. For that reason, in his Arba'in, Imam Nawawi does not mention the chain of any of the hadith. He just gives the hadith itself. And of all the other books of Arba'in that I have gone through, I cannot remember any one that actually brought the chain. They all left it. It was just the hadith by itself. So if you can find a list of 40 short hadith and memorize it, then inshallah we can hope to get that fadila of this hadith as well.
Is there any books,
It's a very good question. It's the first thing I would ask. So the question is there an easy book in which you can find very short hadiths, very easy hadiths to memorize? There's two books that come to mind. One is a book called Zad al-Talibin, which is a primer, a collection of hadiths. The actual point of the book is not to collect hadiths, but the point of the book is to teach Arabic grammar, to teach nahu. But it's done through hadith. The first 40 hadiths in there are very short, and you can memorize them fairly easily. The other collection of 40 hadiths is one written by a scholar by the name of Mullah Ali Qari. And he collected the hadith that are known as Jawami al-Kalam. So the Prophet ﷺ was known as Jawami al-Kalam, meaning he was someone who could take a lot of meaning and condense it into a very couple words, small words. So Mullah Ali Qari, in one of his Arba'in, he wrote more than one. In one of his Arba'in, he actually collected these hadith that were very short with deep meaning. And inshallah, I know that's been printed. I have somewhere in my collection somewhere, but it is available. Zad al-Talibin, Provisions of the Seekers. I think it's been translated as well by Abdurrahman ibn Mangira is the translator.
It's actually available online.
Can you? I haven't been able to find the full PDF. There's an introduction, like the first chapter or something. Meaning the translation.
The
Yeah.
hadith translation.
Okay. The full hadith, just the hadith itself, that you can find easily online as a PDF. But I haven't found the actual English as a complete book. If you find it, let me know. That's why I'm saying it. Okay, inshallah. We'll continue next time. Jazakumullahu khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
chain is solid, the transmitters are solid, the matan is solid, but one is saying one thing and the other is saying the other thing, then the Hanafis will look at the actual individuals who are transmitting the hadith. And if the transmitters of the hadith of one are faqih, meaning not only do they memorize hadith, but they also understand it and they apply it, whereas the narrators of another hadith are just muhaddith, for example, then we will take the fuqaha over the muhaddith, because they will have a deeper understanding as to why the hadith, the proper usage of the hadith.
But wouldn't the muhaddithun, they would have more knowledge of which hadith is stronger, right? So you would take their word over a faqih for which subversion of the hadith.
So one, remember that most faqih are muhaddith. It's not that you don't I'm a physician. I know the pattern of medications. I know their structure, I know where they come from, I know what the side effects are. I'm not a pharmacist, but I have a significant amount of knowledge in this. So fuqaha are similar, but they're not they're not muhaddithun because they haven't dedicated their life into hadith, but their knowledge of hadith by no means. So what people sometimes get tripped up on is that if you have two hadiths that are sahih, what the job of a faqih is going to be is not necessarily throwing one away and keeping one, but finding a way to make them both work together. And if you have to lean towards one or the other, then you're going to lean towards one or the other. So for example, it's well known about Aisha radiallahu anha that she did not allow a marriage without a wedding. She wouldn't allow a woman to get married without a wedding. It's very well known about that. I mean, this is a statement from her. But she married off her niece without her wedding. So you have a contradiction, right? One is the narration of a hadith from her. They're saying this is not permitted. And then we have her actually doing it. Which one are we going to take? One's a sahih hadith form, and the other is her practice. So we take her practice. Saying that the hadith is sahih, there's no doubt about it. She's the one who translated this hadith. But she also knows the usage of the hadith. And so it's, we're going to take it for that reason. So this is what it means to look at the